Hello and welcome to LeaseQuery's Accountant's Angle, a podcast series where our experts answer your most burning questions regarding accounting topics and upcoming pronouncement changes. I am your host, Jason Parker. I am a Senior Alliance Manager here at LeaseQuery, formerly one of our lead solutions consultants, and today I am pleased to be joined by Sarah O'Sullivan, who is LeaseQuery's Senior Director of Product Accounting. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hey, Jason, thanks.
Today's topic is going to cover GASB 96, yet another accounting standard being released for the public sector. So Sarah, to start, quite simply, if you could just give everyone a background on what GASB 96 actually is and how it might differentiate from the maybe more popular standard GASB 87.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the good thing about GASB 96 is that it's going to be very familiar to everybody. It looks a lot and acts a lot the same way as GASB 87. So, you're still going to be going through the process of having to compile all of your contracts and scope in which ones are SBITAs under GASB 96, similar to what everybody's been doing with leases for the past couple of years. But the accounting as well is pretty similar. It's the same concepts of recording a subscription liability and subscription asset and bringing those balances onto your balance sheet for all of your software. So obviously the big difference between the two standards is GASB 87 is for our leases, think tangible, assets. And GASB 96 covers accounting for our, subscription-based IT. So the things that we're thinking about here, a lot of us are using SaaS products now, similar to like LeaseQuery. LeaseQuery would be a SBITA under GASB 96. Our cloud-based ERPs, a lot of the different things, especially these days now that we've become more hybrid in our working arrangements. Anything that an entity is subscribing and using the vendor's IT software that they own rather than purchasing it or building it themselves will be covered under GASB 96.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm glad you brought LeaseQuery up as an example of a subscription-based IT arrangement, because that's my favorite example that we like to give. Could you give everybody detail on the adoption deadline? Because obviously, as accountants look to, plan going into next year, they want to make sure that they're ready to adopt appropriately. When is the adoption deadline? Is there any transition method specifically required by the standard?
Yeah, so the deadline, the effective date for 96 is a year after GASB 87. So there's, not much time in between. You're going to go from 87 and we're going to roll right into 96. But the effective date is specifically for fiscal years starting after, July 1st, 2022 is when the earliest adoption date is for our GASB entities. So for those entities that have a July to June fiscal year, June 30th, 2023 is going to be the first full year that you need to report under GASB 96 in your ACFR. As far as transition, again, it's gonna be really similar to GASB 87. So probably, if you do show prior period information in your annual reports, you are expected to restate those prior periods to reflect GASB 96. So when we talk about comparatives and restatement and having that look back period and everything, whatever you've kind of gotten used to with GASB 87, you're probably going to apply the same methodologies and approaches when you are ready to adopt GASB 96.
Yep. Yeah, that's great intel, Sarah. And for those of you listening, keep in mind, the current fiscal year you are under, most likely as a municipality, you are likely to be under the GASB 96 adoption cycle today. As of next June, if you are on a 6/30 year end, that is when you'll have to actually publish those in the financial statements. So now is the time to get started here. And Sarah, last question that we'll talk about today in our brief conversation. With subscription IT based arrangements specifically, is there any quirks that you've noticed as you have, surveyed the market and helped to build our technology? Just anything that organizations should be thinking about specific to their subscription IT arrangements that as they continue to evaluate their agreements going forward?
Yeah, there are definitely a few things that I would point out about GASB 96 specifically. I think one of the first things is the SBITA and the software subscription contracts tend to be less complex overall than a lot of leases. You have a lot of different types of equipment and assets and land and buildings that you can lease. But what you're going to find is where you might have been dealing with your leases with, CAM and some other add-on expenses and everything, you potentially aren't going to have that elaborate of a setup for your SBITAs. So one thing I know when we were building out our GASB 96 functionality in LeaseQuery is we were able to streamline, a lot of the entry because there's just not as many details. You don't usually have landlords and attorneys and everybody else involved with that. One of the other things that I think is worth mentioning is there is, the possibility that you'll end up with a contract or have an arrangement already with an IT vendor that includes some sort of equipment, your IT equipment, as well as the IT software that you're going to subscribe to. And so what do you do when you have that situation? And the standard GASB 96 specifically addresses this, and the basis for conclusions as well. That's that section after the official standard in GASB's document is where they do a lot of additional kind of interpretation, help explain how they came to the decisions that they did for the standard. But what it points out is it's really, if you are in an arrangement that has IT kind of equipment, the actual tangible assets, computers or something, and it is limited to that, then you're in GASB 87. You're scoped as a lease in that case. If you are a arrangement like subscribing to LeaseQuery, where you don't have any fixed assets or tangible assets that are coming with it, you're just subscribing to our cloud-based software service, then that is going to be scoped into GASB 96. So if you have a scenario where you've got both, essentially what you need to do is use some judgment and determine, what's material. Oftentimes you'll have a software IT subscription arrangement, might have some sort of fixed asset attached to it, but it's potentially very immaterial compared to the whole arrangement, in which case you're going to scope into 96. If it is a material, if the equipment, the asset, the tangible asset itself is material and significant in that arrangement, then you're going to kick back to GASB 87 and scope in as a lease. So that might be a little bit of a tricky thing people will want to think about as they're going through, because those are definitely some real world situations. And I think the third thing, which was definitely something that had a lot to do with when we were building out our functionality and what we wanted to make sure we provided to our customers, is the fact that while the accounting is very similar, a lot of the same concepts, and we're now bringing, all of these agreements, leases, as well as the SBITAs onto our balance sheet with liabilities and asset balances, you do have to present on your financial statements and disclose in your footnotes for your 87 leases and your 96 SBITAs separately. So you can't combine all of that information. So that was something, that was a key impetus in our building out our functionality, is making sure that we could give full confidence that those populations are bifurcated. And so when you're running your entries and your reporting and disclosures for 87, you're getting just your leases as they need to go into your reports. And the same thing with 96, you're getting just your SBITAs. So that's something else I think that would be important to remember, is that they're similar, but they are separate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the insight. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining today's Accountant's Angle podcast. Stay tuned for future podcast episodes where we will continue to discuss other lease accounting topics, as well as topics that range away from lease accounting, like today's GASB 96. And lastly, do not forget to subscribe so you can get new episodes straight to your inbox. We will see everyone next episode.